The Big Show.
Okay, so as promised, joined now by Jordan Schultz, who you need to follow, by the way, on Twitter at Schultz_report. He's also prolific on Instagram at Jordan Schultz, SCHULTZ. He's an NFL insider for The Score. And I got to give you kudos, Jordan. It's really, really hard to, and I'm sure you're going to tell me this isn't the case, but really, really hard to seemingly come out of nowhere and then be breaking NFL news, because we know about Adam Schefter and we know about Ian Rappaport and really the inherent advantages, right, of working for NFL Network, NFL.com. And like, I know that I've talked to owners that have said to me, why would I break it anywhere else? Why wouldn't I break it with the company I own 1/32 of, right? Like, they literally have said that. So, yeah. But you have kind of come onto the scene in a major way. And I don't know if the first question is how or the path. Maybe that's two questions combined into one. But I guess, how have you done it, man? Like, how have you kind of broken through into an industry that is very, very difficult to break into?
Ross, it's such a pleasure to come on, and I really appreciate the kind words. I would say, I don't even know where to start. I guess being relentless, relationship-driven. It was told to me when I was first getting started. You mentioned Adam Schefter. He sat down with me about 12 years ago, and I was really young, and I just said, how did you do it? And he told me it's a relationship business. And I really kept that in mind as I tried to carve my own path. And I think a couple of things. Number one is I try not to ask for anything within 6 months of meeting someone. That's kind of the general rule. And that can vary to a year. Maybe it's 3 months. But basically, I don't want to ask for anything if I haven't known you more than 6 months. And the other part of that is, am I presenting tangible value in return? Because why, to your point, why is anybody, an agent, an owner, a GM, a player, a coach, why would they come to me when there's already more established insiders who've been doing this for decades? And the answer is, I'm going to try to create a genuine relationship that has value on both sides. It's like you don't want to show up to a Christmas party empty-handed. You want to bring something to the table. So I'd say that's been my strategy. But basically, a lot of luck. Being relentless and just loving your craft. I mean, this is, to your point, Ross, it's a hard industry to break in regardless of where you're going. And if you don't really love it, it's just not going to happen, because there's somebody that's more talented or more driven that's going to get what you ultimately want.
All right. So I got another question, dude, that I got to ask you. Why? Like, why do you want to do this? Because I always think, because obviously you're even just your first response, Jordan, very clear. You're a very bright guy. A lot of things you could have done with your life. A lot of things you could do with your life. And I'm sure there's adrenaline. I'm sure it's like the thrill of the hunt. But I also have some idea of what that lifestyle is like.
Yes, you do.
And no chance. That is not for me, bro. Like, but you're choosing this. Like, you're like this is like those movies where they say this is the life we chose, right? Like, this is the life you're choosing. Why? and how does your wife feel about that?
Yeah, that's a constant debate of, do you really need to be on your phone right now? And I'd say like 90% of the time, the answer is no. But you never know what you're going to get if you have your phone with you. And I have a couple phones I use. This is the one we're using right now is like the main phone. But I have another phone in case this one doesn't have service or this one dies, which has happened before. And so I always have that device next to me. My parents say it's like an appendix, and they're right. And I think the bottom line is I'm hyper competitive. I grew up immersed in sports, playing sports, 4 years of college basketball. I wasn't a great athlete, but I really worked at it and I loved it. And the only thing that can come close to draining a three-pointer or getting an and one or getting a defensive stop, drawing a charge, is that adrenaline of breaking a story. That's the only thing that I found that can come close, And it just, you can't match it with anything else. And so I guess that's the why. I want to be great at this. I want to be one of the best. But ultimately, selfishly, the adrenaline of breaking a story, especially a big one, is what fills me up.
That is really cool. It's funny because I tell people a lot, that's the thing I miss the most about football and playing is that feeling of really two things. That feeling of running out there in front of, whatever it is, 75,000 people. I think about this because like the most successful people in the world, right? Like the richest guys, right? The Bezos and Elon Musk or whatever, right? They can't replicate that. Now, I'm sure they could, right? Like I'm sure they have enough money that they could pay to have that many people in the stands. They could pay to put a helmet and shoulder pads on. They could pay to go out there. But like you have to earn that. You know what I mean? Like you have to earn that, and it is a long, hard road. I miss it every day. I actually miss probably as much as anything. I miss the violence. Like, and I think it's okay to say that. I miss hitting people. I wish I could hit people still, because I think that's okay. I think that's okay to admit that. And to be honest with you, Jordan, I do what I do because I love it and because it's as close as I can get. Now, maybe coaching would be a little bit closer, but I was the only Princeton grad to get fired 4 times, and by the time I was 28 years old, so I was not looking to get fired any more than that. So that's awesome. I can absolutely relate to that. It's funny too.
Curious.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because so the other part of this is the relationships that I mentioned, and like for me, because I didn't play in the NFL, the next closest thing is probably doing what I'm doing or maybe coaching, but also creating these relationships with the players as well and trying to empower them, report through the lens of the player, present value, and tell their stories. I'm wondering for you, do you miss the hitting more or the camaraderie of the relationships in the huddle?
Yeah, people ask that all the time. I miss the hitting. And I think most guys say the camaraderie.
Camaraderie, I hear a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is unique. Like a locker room is unique. Just being with guys all the time, like that's unique. And it's obviously different now. I got a family and the whole deal. But I guess I feel like I get a decent amount of camaraderie from my high school buddies, my college buddies, even my buddies around here. Like I host a beer pong tournament. Like I get some of the stuff that comes with that. Yeah, I just can't replicate the violence. Like most people are not like that. Like even my daughters, Jordan, they're not really into sports like contact sports. They like softball, they like tennis, but like basketball or soccer or field hockey, like when you can run into somebody. Meanwhile, I was the exact. I remember in 10th grade, I got laid out by like the senior lineman. And I started laughing. Like I thought it was hilarious. Like now I got pissed and I tried to kill him after that. But like I even when I was getting my butt kicked, I thought it was I liked the contact.
You liked the impact, you liked the feeling of it. Yeah. It's
without question. It's interesting too because thinking about different questions to ask you and stuff and excited to have you on. And it's so weird because you probably get this all the time. I was torn whether or not to ask you about your dad.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned your family because on the one hand, it's really interesting and it's obviously a part of your story. On the other hand, you probably get asked about it all the time and it's like annoying. So it's like, do I want to be that guy? But also like, that's an interesting thing, right?
No,
like, that's
good.
An interesting part of your life. So anyway, you can I guess intro your dad for folks that don't know, but obviously I do think it's interesting your background, Seattle, your dad, and then you being a college basketball player, but then getting into the NFL side of it.
Yeah, so I grew up, really privileged, right? And I think I have no problem talking about it. It's not, a secret. I try not to bring it up. And hopefully people, find out on their own as opposed to me telling them, right? Like that's always my goal. I almost never bring it up unless it's like really omnipresent. So my dad was and is the founder of Starbucks. And I think as I've gotten older, I'm 37 now, I try to embrace it because I do really appreciate what he did and what my parents have accomplished. But I grew up really, really privileged. And I think part of that it's been a plus and a minus, mostly plus, obviously. The minus has been you don't want people to assume that you're a certain way. You don't want people to assume that you're spoiled or entitled or just got here because of who your parents are. And there are innate advantages, and I'd be lying if I told you there weren't. The positives, which greatly outweigh the negatives, are that I've had opportunities. I was able to go to really good schools. I was able to be surrounded by really smart people, and also I think surrounded by celebrities at a young age. I mean, I remember as a kid like being around athletes and pop stars, and that really shaped me, whether it was Bono or Gary Payton. That was part of my DNA as a young man and as a child. And when I was about 14, my dad bought the Sonics. So you can imagine, Ross, a young teenager.
That is amazing.
A young teenager.
Hey, was that like the Sean Kemp, Gary, or that was right after Sean Kemp and Gary Payton?
Part of it. I think Sean was gone by a year to Cleveland. So we had Gary, but I'll never forget when I was like 14, my dad drove me home from probably basketball practice, and we're sitting in the garage at our house. And he says to me, I need to talk to you about something. And he was really serious. And he says, I'm going to tell you something that nobody else knows other than Mom. And it's really important. And I want to get your opinion. I had no idea. I didn't know what he was going to tell me. And he says, I'm thinking about buying the Supersonics. I might as well have been floating my reaction as a 14-year-old because it was the greatest thing I'd ever heard. I couldn't believe it. I thought he was joking. And that's the type of thing that I've like. That story I haven't told a lot of because I don't want to sound entitled or spoiled to say my dad bought an NBA basketball team. It's just a completely asinine thing. But we had Gary Payton. He then traded Gary for Ray Allen, which didn't go over well in Seattle at the origin of it because Gary was such an icon. But Ray Allen coming in his prime and averaging about 30 points a game, it was a great time. So I got to work out with Ray Allen. Ray Allen broke my nose playing basketball. These are things that nobody else gets to experience. And so as I've gotten older, I've tried to embrace those because I do think it's helped shape me. And I really try to look at it as a positive. I'm so keenly aware, though, Ross, of how I could be perceived and how even talking about this could sound like this guy's just a prick, and I really, really don't ever.
No, honestly, Jordan, it to me, it comes across the exact opposite way. And also, isn't it like what we're all trying to do, like on some level for our kids, right? Like we're all trying to give our kids the best life possible. And by the way, what your dad accomplished really has almost nothing to do with what you're accomplishing because nobody really, and take this the right way, but like in the NFL insider business, nobody really cares. Like, right? You know what I mean? Like, that's cool that that's what your dad did, but like people aren't going to give you information or talk with you about that. You've had to earn it the hard way. I love it. Almost as much, Jordan, as I love Labatt Blue Light. Make sure you are taking your life to the next level with friends and family, living life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. All right, so let's talk about some of the news you broke this offseason. I thought the one that was really jumped out to me was Geno Smith's contract, Jordan. And what's interesting to me about that is it was announced as this big deal. And then Pete Carroll came out and started saying, well, Geno's kind of betting him on himself with this one a little bit. And so I'm curious about how these negotiations went because it seemed like it was a longer commitment. And now it almost feels like it was more of a one-year deal. Yeah. And there are people, I guess people still that think that they might have taken Anthony Richardson at 5 if the Colts hadn't.
So Seattle gives Geno $105 million over 3 years. That was the best deal he was going to get. He didn't have a ton of leverage to go elsewhere. Seattle rewarded him because he rewarded them. In other words, he learned so much, and we've had real conversations in depth about this. Him and me, whatever you want to say, about his learning process of being a backup basically for like 7 or 8 years. You know, he backs up Eli. He's with the Chargers as a backup. He's backing up Russ. He learned a lot. And the biggest takeaway I had from him was he wouldn't have done it differently, right? Like as a second round pick and All-American at West Virginia, who comes into the league and doesn't have the instant success with the Jets, I thought he would have said, if I could do it differently, I'd change it, you know? But he actually said to me that he really felt like those moments, those years as a number 2 humbled him and taught him a lot about the game and to respect the game and understand how to be a pro. So he grew a lot. That's why he was a Pro Bowler. It's why he was Comeback Player of the Year. And it's why he got that contract. And yes, there are outs after year 1 and year 2, but Seattle to me is committed to him. They believe they have a roster that can contend right now, that can potentially win the NFC. And I never got the sense, Ross, that they were going to go quarterback, even if Richardson was there at 5.
I agree, Jordan, and I didn't know what other teams would say based on 1 year, like Geno is our guy moving forward. And I actually think the Seahawks are a sneaky team to win the NFC that people are not talking about enough. With some of the additions they've made, if Geno plays as well as he did last year, I think the Eagles came back to the pack a little bit with some of their losses. Who knows with the Niners, with their quarterback situation. Obviously Aaron Rodgers isn't in Green Bay anymore. I do think there's opportunity there for Seattle, certainly. It's interesting because
one thing too.
Yeah.
Early on in the season, I went back to Seattle for the Giants game. Seattle won that game, but I spent a few hours with Geno and DK the day before, 2 days before, because I really wanted to understand their dynamic. Because at that point, they were starting to click, and you could see that they had something brewing pretty special. And I asked DK, what's the biggest difference from Russ to Geno? And he didn't want to disparage Russ, but he said similarly to Russ, Geno's understanding of the checks and the audibles and his communication with Waldron, the OC, and just his preparation reminded him a lot of Russ, which I thought was pretty cool, because at that point, you know, Geno was pointing upward, but he hadn't popped necessarily yet. It was like week 4, week 5. And you could see it, but then it really, really took off after that, the next few weeks. And that conversation really stuck out to me because it was the first time that I had heard directly from DK and from Geno that they felt like they had something super, super special. And remember, post Russell Wilson, everyone just assumed that it was going to be Drew Lock, or that if it was Geno, his job wouldn't be cemented. And so that said a lot to me, and I think it really set the tone for the season.
Last question, Jordan. Any thoughts on where we might see DeAndre Hopkins land?
Well, I mentioned Kansas City. I mentioned Buffalo. Ross, they don't have any money. They have no cap space. So the 2 teams that stand out to me would be New England because of Belichick. They signed Juju, and maybe Cleveland. And I would love to see him rekindle that magic with Deshaun Watson. Obviously, Amari Cooper's there as well. They do have some space. Andrew Berry could get aggressive. It's an odd time, though, for Hopkins in the sense that, yes, he's a perennial All-Pro. He's 30. He's still a really good player. But teams have already allocated their money for skill positions. So I don't necessarily think there's a rush. He has new representation. But Cleveland and New England stand out to me. I'm just selfishly thinking, can you imagine what it would be like to have Hopkins, Diggs, and Allen, or Mahomes, Kelsey, and Hopkins? I don't know how you get there from a financial standpoint.
Make sure you check him out on social media. As you can tell, he's excellent. You need to be following at Schultz_report on Twitter. He's Jordan Schultz on Instagram, and he is excellent. Jordan, so great to talk with you, man. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Ross, my pleasure, and I big fan as well, bro. And what you said about contact and those hits, that's what I get from this conversation. Missing the hits.
Thanks, man.
See ya.